What if the scariest thing isn't what's in front of you, but what's lurking just beyond the shadows? Tonight you'll hear 4 true horror stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about fear. These are real encounters, real terror. If you dare to watch, hit that subscribe button. And remember, you might not be alone after all. Story 1: The Haunted House. The house had always been big, but that night it felt suffocating. At first I thought I'd enjoy the silence. It was just me, 12 years old, at home with my brother Zach, who'd promised to stay in the house while my parents went out. But when Zach decided to meet his friends, it left me alone in that huge house, and that silence started to feel more like a cage than freedom. The house had old wooden floors that creaked underfoot, windows that rattled in the wind, and that was part of its charm, its history. But that night, every sound felt different. The usual creaks of the floor seemed too deliberate, too intentional, as though they were telling me someone or something was moving through the house with me. I decided to distract myself by watching a movie. I'd picked a horror movie, a classic. But as soon as the movie began, the house seemed to come alive. The walls groaned and the wind howled outside, sending eerie sounds through the open cracks of the old windows. But it wasn't just the wind I was hearing. It was as if something or someone was pacing through the hallways. Every footstep sent my heart racing. Every sound that echoed made my breath catch in my throat. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the TV, but the shadows that played across the walls of my living room were becoming too much to bear. I stood up and walked toward the stairs, slowly, cautiously. The sounds seemed louder as I crept through the house. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash downstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of the front door creaking open. My blood ran cold. Zach was supposed to be gone for hours, and the door should have been locked. I ran upstairs, heart pounding, eyes darting from the shadows of the corners of each room. There was no sign of anyone. I checked my bedroom door and locked it, my hands shaking as I turned the key. I had no phone, no way to contact anyone, and I knew my parents wouldn't be home for hours. The house felt alive, as though it was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. In desperation, I crawled into the crawl space behind my room's wall. It was cramped, claustrophobic, but it was the only place where I could hide. I squeezed myself into the tiny, dark space, closing the door behind me. The air was thick with dust, and I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me. I tried not to breathe too loudly, too quickly, knowing that if whoever or whatever was in the house found me, there was nowhere to run. From my hiding place, I could hear the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. They moved from room to room, through the hallways, and they were getting closer to my room. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't hear the sound of my heart pounding in my chest. And then it happened. The door creaked open. I froze, my entire body paralyzed with fear. A shadow moved across the floor, tall, dark, and unmistakably human. I could hear it breathing, slow, measured. It wasn't my brother. It wasn't anyone I knew. The air grew thick, suffocating. The house seemed to close in around me, and I could feel something dark and malevolent in the air. I stayed as still as possible, hoping beyond hope that the figure would leave. But instead, I heard it move toward me, closer and closer. The sound of footsteps near the door, the cold breath on the back of my neck. And then, that whisper, so faint but so terrifying. "You're not alone." The figure reached for the lock. The door to my room creaked as the knob turned. My heart nearly stopped. What happened next would haunt me for years. Story 2: The Drunken Neighbor, Possessed by a Spirit. The night started like any other. I was home alone with my grandparents. My parents had just separated, and I felt safe in the familiar warmth of their house. We had a neighbor, David, who often stopped by to help my grandpa with chores or just to hang out and drink beer. I had grown up with David around. He was always friendly, always there when we needed him. But that night, when David knocked on the door, something was different. It was late past 9 p.m. and my grandpa and grandma had just left for bingo. I was alone for only a few minutes before David showed up at the door, but something in the air had changed. The usual cheer I felt when David visited had turned into a cold feeling creeping up my spine. When I opened the door, David didn't look the same. He was swaying on his feet, his shirt half untucked, and his eyes were clouded, vacant. His face was pale, but there was something more disturbing than just his drunkenness. His eyes, they weren't right. They were wide, unblinking, and dark, a darkness that seemed to pulse from within. "I just need to wait for your grandpa," David slurred, stumbling into the house without invitation. The way he walked didn't seem like him. It was almost like he wasn't in control of his own body. His movements were jerky, unnatural. I thought it was just alcohol, but the dread building in my chest told me something far worse was at play. David didn't sit down like he usually did. Instead, he stood in the middle of the living room, staring off into space as though something unseen was pulling his attention away. I didn't want to be rude, but I began to feel uneasy. "David, are you okay?" I asked, my voice quivering despite myself. But when he turned to face me, it wasn't David looking back at me. His face twisted, his smile stretched unnaturally wide, and his eyes grew darker, deeper, like the pits of the earth. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice low and almost guttural. It didn't sound like him. "I have to do this. You shouldn't have let me in." My body went cold. I felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot as David took a step toward me. His gaze was still locked on me, but it wasn't him anymore. It was something else, something ancient and terrifying. Then, before I could even scream, he lunged at the kitchen counter and grabbed a knife, the cold steel glinting in the dim light. He pressed it to my chest, just hard enough for me to feel the sharp edge. "Stay quiet," he hissed, "or I'll make sure you're silent forever." But in the split second, when I thought I was going to die, I heard the sound of my grandpa's truck pulling up in the driveway. David froze, his grip on the knife faltering. The moment was broken, and David's expression changed again back to normal, almost confused. My grandpa rushed inside, and David suddenly looked like he had just woken up from a dream. "David, what are you doing?" my grandpa demanded, his voice full of fury. But David just stared at him, dazed. That night, we never talked about what happened, but my grandpa knew what I had felt, that David hadn't been David at all. He had been possessed. I never saw David again after that, and my grandpa's warnings about spirits and curses became clearer in my mind. David had been chosen, and whatever dark force had taken over him was waiting for someone else next. Story 3. The Haunted Guest. It was the summer of 2020, and I was home alone for the night. My parents were out of town, and I was just relaxing, playing video games when I got a call from Mason. He wasn't someone I hung out with much, but we knew each other from school. When Mason called me, I could sense the desperation in his voice. "Hey man," he said, "I really need your help. Can I drop Neil off at your place? He's in a bad way, and I can't have him stay with me tonight." I hesitated, mainly because Neil hadn't been acting right for weeks. He'd started talking about weird things, about conspiracies, about hearing voices, and he was always nervous, always looking over his shoulder. But Mason was frantic, and I caved. I told him it was fine. When Neil arrived, I immediately knew something was wrong. Neil wasn't the same guy I used to hang out with. His eyes were wide, unfocused. His movements were stiff, robotic. He didn't even acknowledge me when I opened the door, just walked past me into the house like he was in a trance. "Well, what's going on, man?" I asked, trying to get his attention. He didn't respond. He just started pacing around, muttering to himself. His eyes darted from corner to corner, like he was seeing things that weren't there. "You all right?" I asked again, but this time he looked at me, and it wasn't Neil. "Are all the doors locked?" he asked, his voice low and serious. At that moment, something clicked in my brain. This wasn't Neil. Something was in him, something that wasn't human. I tried to laugh it off, tried to play it cool, but the unease in my stomach only deepened. Neil wasn't interested in TV or games. Instead, he wandered into the kitchen and started eyeing the knives. His hand hovered over the drawer, and I could feel my heart race. I tried to stop him, but his grip on the drawer was unnervingly strong. Before I could move, Neil reached for a steak knife. My blood ran cold. I rushed forward and slammed the drawer shut, but Neil didn't react. He just stared at me with wide, hollow eyes and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was empty, nothing behind it. I told him we needed to get some fresh air, that we could go to the park. Anything to get him out of the house. I led him to the door, but when I locked it behind him, I felt the weight of something sinister creeping back in. What was happening to Neil? Later, Mason explained everything. Neil had been using drugs that triggered something in his mind, something that turned him into a vessel for something darker. I never saw Neil the same way again. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped him that night. Story 4. The shadow in the window. I remember the day like it was yesterday. My mum had gone grocery shopping, leaving me home alone. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and I was outside shooting hoops, trying to make the most of my free time. The basketball bounced against the pavement, the sound echoing through the quiet street. But then I looked up, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't just a shadow, like you might expect. There was someone standing in the upstairs window. I couldn't make out their face, but I could see the silhouette moving behind the blinds. My stomach sank. I told myself it was just my sister, maybe she'd come home early. But then the figure shifted. It wasn't my sister, it wasn't anyone I recognized, and it didn't move like a person. It was slow, deliberate, unnatural. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. I ran inside, panic setting in. I knew I shouldn't have been alone. I called out to see who was home, but no answer came. The house was too quiet. Then, from upstairs, I heard the voice, deep, low, and unmistakable. "Rad, come upstairs." It wasn't my mum, it wasn't my sister, it wasn't anyone I knew. The voice was hollow, echoing through the house like it had been waiting for me. The fear took over. I grabbed the house phone and ran outside, dialing my mum's number. When she didn't believe me, I felt helpless, terrified. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something had been wrong all along. The police arrived and they searched the house. They checked every room, the closets, the attic. There was no one there, no trace of anyone. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. That night I woke up to find something standing in my room. A dark figure, tall and still, watching me from the corner. I screamed, but when I opened my eyes again, it was gone. That was the last time I ever felt safe in that house. The figure never left.